Welcome to a special edition of Unprecedented. We sit at the intersection of law and politics to talk about the United States Supreme Court, things that are happening in the Supreme Court on its regular docket, on its emergency shadow docket, inside the court and influencing the court, outside the court, ethics, rulings now that the new term has opened, and really important oral arguments, many of which we put up on Legal AF live for our audience to follow. And I'm so pleased to have on this special edition of Unprecedented, while Dina Dahl, my regular partner, is traveling, Professor Ray Brescia. You may know Professor Brescia from his appearances on mainstream media, whose names shall remain nameless, and some other Legal AF related affiliates like Michael Cohen. He's a professor of law at Albany Law School. I don't know what Albany Law School's mascot is, whatever they are. But he's a leader in the area of public interest law, having been involved with lawsuits and, of course, teaching in the area, and just a regular legal commentator. And I'm pleased because Ray, off of this, is also going to be a regular contributor here on Legal AF. Because if you don't know Ray, Professor Brescia, before, I think after you're done watching his work here with us, you're going to want to see more. The audience is going to demand more Professor Ray Brescia. Let's bring him on. Hey, Professor, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me. What did they say? I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
That was the end of the movie.
That's right. It was the end. Right. That's true.
let's start at the beginning. We have I start a lot of these overviews about the United States Supreme Court this go around with, this is one of the most important oral arguments. I just did that over Voting Rights Act and the Louisiana case and the maps. But Donald Trump's entire presidency, I mean, is on. It's like the Princess and the Pea. The entire administration, domestic and foreign policy and economic policy, sits on the slender shoulders of his tariff policies, right? 130 plus tariffs, imposed on all of our economic relationships, frenemies, enemies, allies, and the like, bringing in hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, a tax being passed on to the American consumer, because who's paying it? Japan's not paying the tax. The importer's paying it. The American importer's paying the tax and passing it along in large bulk to the American consumer at a time when the economics, the Trumponomics, are crushing America's hopes and dreams. That entire program is up for grabs with a United States Supreme Court oral argument this coming week. And with that as a backdrop, why don't you brief our audience? We like to joke that this is like a TED Talk meets a law school class, perfect for Professor Brescia. Why don't you update our audience who may be joining this story already in progress, what we're talking about when you and I start kicking around IEPA? What is it? What is the narrow issue that's up on appeal? And then when you and I can kibitz about what do we think is going to happen during the oral argument.
Yeah, I'm going to see your description that this is, the centerpiece of the Trump administration's foreign policy, economic policy, and raise you, because I think it's actually bigger than just that. Because as you and your audience knows, there are a lot of other big cases kicking around, all hinging on the idea of what is the president's emergency powers. So I think this goes beyond just the tariffs and economic policies. And to what extent does the judiciary have to defer to the executive branch's determinations on when there's an emergency, right? And that and I can see the gears going. You're like, oh yeah, that's Insurrection Act stuff. That's like everything else they're doing. It's all deportations. It's all an emergency. Bombing of boats in the Gulf of Mexico. It's all an emergency, right? And so if the door is pushed open on the tariffs under IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, right, that Congress, right, which has the power to impose tariffs under the Constitution, which has delegated to the president certain powers in emergencies to do certain things around trade. And I say certain things specifically with intent, because one of the things that IEPA does not grant is the power to impose tariffs, right? And that's what we're arguing about, right? So, as he said before, IEPA authorizes the executive branch in emergency situations to take actions around trade and economic policy, international economic policy, when things like the oil crisis happen, right?
Or the early version of the chip semiconductor crisis with Reagan in '87 and the Japanese, right? Which is where the Ontario trolling ad came in from the World Series, right?
Right. So there are things that the executive branch and the president can do when carrying out this delegated authority from Congress, authority that is in Article 1, right? The congressional article. There are things that the president can do, right? Lists a series of things they can do. It doesn't say that the executive branch, the president, can impose tariffs.
Well, stop right there. Stop right there. Because there is a difference between, and to prove your point about emergencies, Reagan in '87, Trump in 2025. Reagan in '87 has a flooding of the market of semiconductor chips by Japan, threatening to overwhelm the American chip manufacturing market, which I think at that time was still led by Intel. And that was happening in real time, in real life, where we don't have time to go back to Congress and like pass a big bill. He's got to do something now, right? It's like, the fire hydrant gets backed over and the water is pouring out now. We got to do something about it now in the short term. So as a punishment or as a hammer, something in his tool bag, he imposes a tariff, even though he's a free trader, to stop that particular moment. That's different, isn't it, Ray, than standing in front of the Rose Garden, whatever's left of it, in April and saying, I got an idea. Howard Lutnick, Commerce Secretary, come on up here with a chart of 138 reciprocal tariffs around the world. That's Congress's role, not, right? It wasn't 138 countries ganged up on Donald Trump all at the same time and he had to do something about it. That's an emergency.
Right. And then that also goes back to, although it's obviously different, what did FDR say around Lend-Lease, right? When your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't ask them to pay for the water and the hose, you help them out and then you figure it out later. That's not what's going on. The declared emergency, it's different. It changes by the day. This challenge has to do with some of the tariffs that were imposed around fentanyl from Canada. Like, that's not a thing, right? And other elements of this that we're issuing tariffs against countries that almost don't trade with us, or where we have a trade surplus.
You mean that island that has 4 people on it?
And the penguins, right? So it's this blanket notion. That's why I go back to what is an emergency, right?
Yeah, how could it? Let me interrupt you there. His argument, Trump's argument, is that he inherited a trade deficit. By the way, he doesn't understand trade deficit. He doesn't understand how goods and services go into that equation. Putting that aside for a minute, he inherits a trade deficit that's been going on for more than a decade. How could that possibly be an emergency under IEPA?
Well, what you said before, what is a trade deficit and what does it entail? We are exporters of services. We bring in people to go to our university systems. So we benefit from freer trade. Are there issues where cheap labor in certain countries are undercutting American workers? Of course there are, right? That's been a problem since the '80s, since Ronald Reagan at least, right? So, but this idea, and you have to go into some of the orders, and it's in the court decisions that we can go through this Court of International Trade and the Federal Circuit, like how we got to where we are. But you go into the opinions, and they're describing the orders around these tariffs. There was one point where there was a question about, well, how did you calculate the tariffs? And it was people say, well, I think they put it into ChatGPT or something. It really
would have got a better answer.
There was no rhyme or reason, and there was no connection. First, as you said, is there an emergency because there's a trade deficit? When there's the picture of trade is complicated. It's not simply, oh, we have a trade deficit. So is there an emergency if this has been a 40-50 year trend?
Right.
I think that's something the court's going to have to deal with, and that's what the lower courts have dealt with.
So let's talk about that. International. Why don't you pick up with International Court of Trade? Court of International
Trade. Yeah.
Sorry, soon I'm going to call your law school SUNY Albany.
Don't you dare!
I know. It's Albany Law School. Everybody, we're going to put that in the notes. Court of International Trade in New York. Donald Trump's handpicked court. He doesn't the court the case is originally filed in, so he drags it over to hopefully a more Trumpier court sitting in New York, which nobody ever heard of outside of Albany Law School and maybe Duke Law School, all that. And then he gets a bad ruling because it goes against him. They're like, no, you don't have to, because this is all about, right, Professor Ray, this is all about IEEPA. He's got other abilities to impose tariffs outside of the chain of command of Congress. But there's steps that have to be taken in order to do that. But he chose this one. And that is what it is resting on. So they say no. It gets blocked by the Federal Circuit, which is a specialty appellate court in DC, which deals with things like trade and patents and things. Again, most people, even lawyers, haven't heard of it before. Goes there, and one of the judges for the panel says it was en banc, right? It was like an en banc panel eventually.
Yeah.
One of the judges says, "Show me where the T word of tariffs is even in IEEPA."
Yeah.
And then it ends up with another order. So take it from there forward to the Supreme Court. Then before we end our unprecedented, let's really preview what do we think could happen with the six Republican Trump appointed people, and then the rest of the Supreme Court when they hear oral argument. And who are you going to be looking for in terms of leading the charge, in terms of whether this is going to be thumbs up or thumbs down? Because I got to tell you, as an appellate lawyer, I've walked out of appeal, like regular appellate courts, where sometimes you can't tell if you're going to win or lose. It's hot bench for both sides. Like I've joked, but it's serious. I have won appellate arguments that I thought I lost at the oral argument, and vice versa. But with this Supreme Court, that's why all these headlines are like, Supreme Court looks like they're leading away, supporting Trump position. They wear their heart on the sleeves. You can't play poker with these people. They shouldn't play poker. You know exactly where their head is at. So I want to hear what you think is going to happen and who you're looking for, because we're going to put this up live on Legal AF.
So I think that there are a couple of key questions, and I use that phrase intentionally. Major questions doctrine, right? This is something that the Roberts Court has kind of cooked up. That if it's not a clear delegation to the executive branch to carry out some policy, some practice of Congress, then it's not a proper executive branch action if there's not a clear delegation on a major question, right? A major question like, does the president get to impose these tariffs? Does the do tariffs a power available under IEEPA? Right? We had last year, Nebraska v. Biden, and that was over the student loan forgiveness, right? Where the statute said that, emergency authority during COVID, that the secretary could modify the student loan program, right? And Biden used that authority to modify by relieving a certain amounts of student aid, right? For some people, given the amount that their loan was modified, it ended up being full forgiveness for them.
Right, canceled. Right.
Yeah, canceled. Right. But the court said, well, modify, that's interpreting modify as enabling the executive branch to forgive fully some of borrowers' debt. That's a major question. We can't abide that the Congress gave the executive branch that power.
A whole made up doctrine that you and I did not learn about in law school because it didn't exist, just to make this clear. And what at the heart of it is an argument that if it's such a big deal, Congress would expressly, explicitly put it in a law. And it wouldn't be through interpretation. So that's what their argument is. Oh, that's so big. That had to have been an express delegation. So right, and I've said this about the tariffs before. Are they going to use the major questions doctrine, which they invented, to shoot down something and say, no, Congress didn't intend for the IEPA to set 138 country tariffs and undermine Article 1 of the Constitution? So my question for you is, this Supreme Court is so enamored with Article 2 and Article 2 powers. I almost think that their personal pocket copies of the Constitution only has Article 2 in it. And like the Second Amendment. It's like it's all twos. There's nothing else in there.
Well,
what about Article 1? What are they going to do about Article 1 Congress?
For some justices, it seems that Article 2 only is invoked when there's a Republican president.
Well, that's true too. And of course, all these people filed briefs, all these different groups and states and small businesses and chambers of commerce, all against the tariff program. Silent is any brief filed by Congress, by the MAGA Congress.
Yeah, which is interesting, right, to say the least. But so that's one issue. I think the big issue, and this is something that the Federal Circuit really hung its hat on, or its robes on, is the major questions doctrine. And then another question is, just reading the statute. So that's a hobby horse of Justice Gorsuch, right? One would think that Justice Gorsuch would read IEPA and say, show me where it says the word tariff. It says a lot of other things. Show me where it says that imposing tariffs is one of the things that the president can do under IEPA, under this grant of congressional authority that is embedded in Article 1 to impose tariffs, right? So I really hope there's another justice who I hope is going to be invoked. It's the other Justice Jackson, Justice Robert Jackson, who wrote probably the most famous concurring opinion in Supreme Court history. He just happens to be a graduate of Albany Law School, but I digress.
Good plug for Albany Law School professor.
Another plug. Who's also featured in the movie about Nuremberg, which is awesome.
Oh yes, because
he prosecutor at Nuremberg, right?
Right. He played by sort of played by Spencer Tracy in a fictitious version of it in the Nuremberg case.
So judgment in Nuremberg. So that concurring opinion, which Justice Barrett referenced in her own confirmation hearing, saying that that sort of what he set up, what's this tripartite way of looking at the exercise of presidential power, right? It's at its zenith when it is operating with its own powers and express grant by Congress. It's in a gray area where that's not clear. But then when it's operating solely, within the authority granted by Congress, that's where it's at its weakest point, and that's where we are. We are in Justice Jackson's third ring of the law.
Well, I hope the advocates remind her of that when they're, I know they did it in their briefing, but hopefully that comes up there.
And that's, that case, you have to think about that case. That's Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company, right? V. Sawyer, where in the middle of the Korean War, right, the steel mills, the unions were striking at the steel mills, and President Truman tried to stop the strike and get the steel mills going because he thought that undermined the war effort, right? So in the middle of a shooting war, right, there's a concern that there won't be enough steel to support the troops. And the Supreme Court says, you don't have the authority to seize the mills and get them up and running again, right?
That's a real emergency.
It's a real emergency, right? And you were operating outside of any authority in the Constitution, right? And here, the authority to impose tariffs is in Article 1, right? It's Congress's power that they delegate to, in limited circumstances, to the president, right? But the limited circumstances aren't present here, right? Or they don't even grant the tariff authority. So there are some authorities in emergencies, right? But not including tariff.
Right. And you see, just as a little bit of context or backdrop leading into the oral argument, you got things as diverse as the Wall Street Journal editorial board coming out and saying the Supreme Court, using an example of Donald Trump penalizing Canada 10% because they ran an ad. They ran an ad to troll him over, or Ontario did, over Reagan's 1987 speech, which we've all listened to as a free trader, about why in this one circumstance he was going to nail Japan because of the semiconductor flood of semiconductor chips to save American industry, which seems like a pretty good emergency. So you got the Wall Street Journal saying, here's a good reason why you should rein in Donald Trump. Look what he's doing. At the same time, the Senate gets together, right, and overturns his decision to penalize Brazil because he doesn't like the fact that the Trump of the Amazon is going to jail for a long time for his Jan 6 moment in the sun in trying to stop the peaceful transfer of power in Brazil. Like, no, a dictator that tried to overthrow is going to jail. No, 50% tariff. The Senate was like, you're not doing that, which is interesting because the Senate did that, but again, didn't file a brief to give the Congress's position about its own powers.
Yeah. Well, and it's not like there aren't mechanisms to impose some of these tariffs. They're just democratic mechanisms, right? And maybe some of them will be supported democratically and some of them won't be, right? Like, there are mechanisms to do this, and that's to work with Congress to come up with these tariffs in a rational way that's supported by, economists, where people will agree, lawyers and economists getting together, and elected officials doing it the right way, as opposed to doing it, by fiat, because the president thinks he can and thinks that, now we can go on this tour of Asia and give out get presents and give out goodies because he's now pulling back the tariffs it makes no sense.
It absolutely makes no sense because other than I need to find a way to replace the income tax revenue that I'm going to eliminate because I'm going to bend over backwards for my billionaire friends, and so I'll point to this big $1 trillion pile of money. Every president that has had a successful economy in the last 50 years has been effectively a free trader and has tolerated some portion of trade deficit. And I like the way you put it earlier. It depends how you define a trade deficit. If you add services in, that's not a deficit. If you add in exporting students and the impact on the economy related to that, it's not. But Clinton tolerated a trade deficit and had a roaring economy and huge job creation.
And raise taxes.
And raise taxes, right? That didn't kill the economy, quite the opposite. Biden jump starts, right, with his defibrillator, the dead economy. Maybe pumped a little bit too much cash into it with the stimulus package, but that can be debated in the future. But then is able to do a glide path to create a lot of jobs and have a very strong economy with the exact same trade deficit, turns it over to Trump, who within 9 months kills the economy and is now going back to high tariffs like the Smoot-Hawley Act. And the last time we had that in America, it was one of the things that led us into the Great Depression.
Right. Right. And then you look at, with Argentina and Argentinian beef, it's like the cattle ranchers in the United States are getting crushed by the tariffs and the price of beef is going up. And now we're going to undercut them by importing low tariff Argentinian beef. I don't understand what's going on.
No, yeah, because he put $40 billion into make Argentina America, apparently, to benefit, let's be frank, friends of the Treasury Secretary, who are heavily invested in the debt of Argentina when he used to work at the Soros Fund. I mean, this doesn't take long. When I tell our audience, if the policy looks weird and warped, it always is connected to the Trump family making money or those in his inner circle making money, as opposed to what an American president is supposed to worry about and the job for which he was elected, which is to make our lives, our national security, our economic and our dignity better, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Because I went on a rant.
Razor, it really is. It's heartbreaking. And people, we just, you like to break news. There was a order issued on the SNAP benefits.
So two orders.
Is that right? So I'm behind you. But that's there's the ability to fund that moving forward, and why not? Now I think hopefully that those orders will remain in place. It's tax cuts and benefit cuts at the same time.
Yeah, really crazy. Professor Ray Brescia, Albany Law School, going to be a regular contributor here on Legal AF and sort of sitting in for Dina Dahl on a special edition of Unprecedented. We're going to be live streaming the oral argument at the United States Supreme Court. I'm happy to say that our audience on the live stream often beats the official version of the live stream by the United States Supreme Court. We usually get 50, 60, 70,000 people to watch that in real time. And then we do commentary and hot takes around it. You and I, Ray, will know within a half an hour how that oral argument is going and how do we think they're going to rule. There's a lot of the Trump administration's credibility internally is really riding on this. This would be a tremendous setback to the administration, right?
Oh, I think so. But again, I think that there's actually even a bigger question than just the tariffs is the president's emergency powers.
Your point is, if they get away with this, being able to say, that's a rebellion, and that's an insurrection, and that's an emergency economic, and I get all these superpowers, what's next?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. As the Supreme Court considers the National Guard and the Seventh Circuit, which you and I are going to do something separately about that, the Insurrection Act, as people, as another hot take here. But so we've reached the end of Unprecedented. Thank you to our audience. We're going to cross, or have already crossed, 900,000 subscribers in our first year of existence. We're going to reach 1 million subscribers before the end of the year if it kills me. And the reason we talk about it, so hit the free subscribe button here now, is because the larger we get in terms of subscriber base, the more we can get contributors like Professor Ray Brescia, like newsmakers, like former judges and attorneys general and senators and the rest all come on and talk to our audience. It gives us that level of street credibility. As an example, in about 2 weeks, I'm going to be going to Scottsdale, Arizona to interview in 2 separate panels, 11 Democratic attorneys general at a conference of theirs, bring them on board at exclusive interviews for Legal AF. And, that's what I think our audience is looking for from this particular channel. And with your help, we will get there. So until our next unprecedented, shout out to the Midas Mighty and the Legal AFers. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.